Social Media, Politics, and the Fourth Estate, in partnership with the Society of Professional Journalists, Ann Arbor.
Hello, and welcome to the first ever community and campus event hosted by the Ann Arbor area-wide student chapter of the national organization, the Society of Professional Journalists. My name is Crystal Hurt, and I'm the Director of Public Relations and Outreach of the Society of Professional Journalists, Ann Arbor. The purpose of this event, titled Social Media, Politics, and the Fourth Estate, is to consider the ever-fluctuating relationships between social media, politics, and reporting. As we look toward the 2020 elections and as we observe shifts in how political information is relayed to the public due to the use of social media, we see that fake news might not be the only issue facing reporting today. Instead, the rise of social networking changes the barriers between politicians and the public and often blurs the lines journalists face in reporting today. Over time, in fact, we've seen social media change all aspects of reporting processes, not just those related to political news. The Society of Professional Journalists is the oldest organization representing journalists in the United States. Its Ann Arbor chapter was started by myself and a number of other students across the University of Michigan campus in August 2018 for the purpose of bridging the different silos of journalism, of student and professional journalism in the area, providing skill building, networking, and training for student journalists, and increasing discourse in our community surrounding journalism.
My name is Alexa St. John, and I am founding president of SPJ Ann Arbor. We appreciate you attending this event, and we want to say thank you to the panelists for coming as well, especially on one of our first sunny Fridays here. I invite you to engage with us throughout the evening if you'd like on Twitter at SPJ Ann Arbor. So I'd first like to introduce our panelists for today's event. We have some very esteemed panelists here, and so the bios are a little bit long. But afterwards, we'll have a series of questions and then the opportunity for a few questions from the audience at the end. So today's panelists include Congresswoman Debbie Dingell. Congresswoman Dingell represents the 12th District of Michigan in the U.S. House of Representatives and serves on the House Committee on Energy and Commerce in addition to being a senior whip. She is a member of the Subcommittee on Communications and Technology, the Subcommittee on Digital Commerce and Consumer Protection, and the Subcommittee on the Environment. Congresswoman Dingell resides in Dearborn, Michigan, and she holds both a BSFS in Foreign Services and an MS in Liberal Studies from Georgetown University. Seema Mehta is a political writer for the Los Angeles Times and has been selected to be a Knight-Wallace Fellow at the university for this academic year. She was assigned to cover the 2018's governor's race and U.S. Senate contest in California and previously covered the 2016, 2012, and 2008 presidential campaigns, as well as multiple gubernatorial, Senate, and mayoral races. She is a frequent face on television, appearing weekly on MSNBC, as well as CNN, ABC, BBC, and other outlets. She was named one of the top state political reporters in the nation by the Washington Post, completed a media fellowship at Stanford University, and served as an alumna in residence at Syracuse University. She also contributed to the Times coverage of the Las Vegas mass shooting that won a 2018 Sigma Delta Chi Award for Deadline Online Reporting, as well as the devastating wildfires that won the 2004 Pulitzer Prize for Breaking News. She also won a 2008 John Swett Award for Media Excellence for an investigative series about the Santa Ana Unified School District creating false class rosters to qualify for state class size reduction funding. Alex Kellogg is a proud Ann Arbor, Michigan native and award-winning journalist who is currently a regular contributor to the Christian Science Monitor, where he covers Rust Belt cities such as Flint, Detroit, and Chicago, trends in urban education, and more. Alex holds an honors degree from Harvard, but his graduation was delayed after he landed an internship and later a job in journalism at Reuters East Africa Bureau while studying abroad. He has also worked full-time for the CBS affiliate in Boston, the Chronicle of Higher Ed, the Detroit Free Press, NPR, and the Wall Street Journal, where he won 3 national awards for his coverage of the historic U.S. auto bankruptcies and the resilience of everyday Detroiters during the Great Recession. And finally, Daniel Rivkin is an international media executive who has worked in some 70 countries as a journalist, producer, bureau chief, and global product manager for Reuters, and then as a general manager and corporate communications consultant for governments and some of the world's largest companies, NGOs, and international agencies. At Reuters, he worked in New York, Washington, D.C., and London as a producer and editor, and then was TV bureau chief in Brussels and Paris, returning to London to manage global facilities. His strategic communications work included projects for such diverse clients as Greenpeace and BP, Amnesty International and the British Foreign and Commonwealth Office, the World Economic Forum, and more. At the Center for International Reproductive Health Training, he now looks after writing, editing, and producing articles, videos, web, and social content, and conference materials, raising the profile of CIRHT's partner institutions and their accomplishments in line with the Center's goals. So thank you again all for being here today. We appreciate it. Our first question that we'd like to start with, and how we'll do this is we don't necessarily have to go in a line. Whoever would like to answer first, of course, can answer. And if you don't have an answer, I'm sure you will for the next question. So from each of your unique individual experiences, what kind of impact do you think social media has when either bridging gaps or creating them between political or authority figures and the news media today?
Anybody want to start? Okay, I'll start. Oh, go ahead.
You go.
No, you start.
Can you hear me? So I'm on a kick, actually, because I think while social media was started to unite us, that it is dividing us. And I think that this country is being divided and this world is being divided by fear and hatred. I think it is a place that people can anonymously post comments and rhetoric that is just so unacceptable, so divisive, so vitriolic. And I, since the New Zealand shooting, have had it. So asking me this question at this time, we've got to, and all of us have a responsibility. Everybody wants to blame a leader. You know, is it the White House? Is it every one of us has responsibility? And I'm at the moment down on the way people use social media, just in case you can't tell.
Thank you.
I mean, I think that it's the way that people use it for sure, and we all do have a responsibility around that, and to listen to some of the other voices that we might not listen to normally. But that initially with social media, I found the same serendipity on social media that I found in a newspaper. I had an interesting news feed of friends who would share things that I might not have seen, something from the Jerusalem Post or something from some science website or something, and I found it refreshing and a real interesting source of news. And now we've all been sort of algorithmized into our echo chambers, and we don't see that many other voices. We're kind of almost prevented from it, and now they've gotten rid of the news feed on a lot of these on a lot of sites, and so you can't even see what other people are seeing and reading. So we have responsibility, but you know, I would put some of the blame on the digital companies on Facebook and on Google, who are.
Oh, I'm not leaving them alone.
No. You know, and now they're getting more and more powerful, and this year, digital ad spend is going to be higher than non-digital ad spend for the first time. It overtook TV in 2017, and now it's taken over all of non-digital. So they're only getting more powerful, and if you're a news agency of any sort, it's really hard to fight them because you need the audience. So it's you know, they're in a really dominant position. I don't know how we fight that, how we fight the algorithm.
I have a sort of complicated stance on this, I guess, because in some ways, you know, social media has allowed us to reach so many more readers, to reach so many more viewers, to allow them to come into events. Like last night I was at a Trump rally in Grand Rapids, and the readers, you know, who follow me, like they can see real time what's happening there. So it does a service in terms of providing information, but especially in recent years, the discussion has gotten so coarse, and it's. You know, we used to always get a nasty letter here or there, but the anonymity has just made it increase exponentially. And this is a little graphic, but my one major example of this was in the 2016 campaign when I wrote something about the Trump campaign that some of his supporters didn't like. And you know how we had those like frog people on Twitter? They made a video where they photoshopped my head onto a video of a naked woman defecating in India, and set it loose on Twitter. And like, I mean, like my husband's friend saw it and was like, is your wife okay? And like, I had to leave social media for a week. So there's like the opportunity for really bad, ugly things. And it just seems like it's gotten so much worse. So I would love, I'd like to preserve, you know, the access and the good things it can do while somehow getting rid of the anonymity.
Yeah, I think you guys are all right. The anonymity does seem to give people the opportunity to say things that they would never generally say to you face to face, and that in normal human interaction, you would not have conversations like this. And I see it degenerate all the time. I just put up a post on a housing website in Atlanta because I'm thinking of moving there, and I ended up getting trolled by somebody who was totally unrelated to what I was asking about, which was housing opportunities. I was going to mention a couple of my personal experiences of covering this stuff. I wrote a story for NBC News about the Black Lives Matter movement and its impact, which I think it's easy to argue that it's basically the most important civil rights in the domestic American context movement of our time, arguably, one of. What the research found, I was writing about a pointer study, and what the research found is that basically there's a lot of engagement going on within those communities, right? People are able to have conversations with people around the country that they might not be able to access, and I'm sure that's true for other communities. But by the same token, I was going to share another anecdote about, I worked for the Free Press. I think it's no secret that some of the comments that you see on the Free Press and the news are incredibly bigoted all the time. And in fact, I was even writing for BET at one point, and they were able to check and see that some of the people that were writing this stuff were actually black. So they're just actually writing to incite their, people just want to, create an argument. But one of the things that I found when I went from the Detroit Free Press to the Wall Street Journal, which I went from being a local reporter in the suburbs to covering the city for a national audience, and there would be a lot of ignorant comments that you would see around sort of, liberals ruin the city, or, it's just sort of typical arguments that you would hear from sort of business elites. And one of the things that I found that was valuable as a reporter is humanizing stories and writing about regular, everyday people, because those people are sort of unimpeachable. It's hard to argue against somebody who's doing something that, often in Detroit, the stories are extraordinary, and in a lot of marginalized communities, the stories are extraordinary. So I think there are some ways in which social media can be of value. For the Black Lives Matter movement, after some of the more negative things that happen, obviously we have a sort of almost toxic atmosphere around race in America. There was a kind of a sway in terms of the opinion about the movement based on some of the things that happened. So I don't think it's all bad. I think for a certain generation it's normalized and they're used to it, and this is all they know, and it will always be there. And they might experience it different than people of our generation. But yeah, it's clearly problematic.
Thank you. Daniel, I think you used the word powerful in your response, but this goes for all of you. What makes social media so powerful, whether for political figures or journalists and comm strategists? Is it just the fact that you can be anonymous, or it's so widespread, or, how does it allow all these types of people to bypass barriers that there were before?
You don't need the media in some ways that you needed the media before, and President Trump's a great example of this. He communicates with millions and millions and millions of his followers without any sort of filter, without any sort of screen. He can communicate with them directly, and that's incredibly powerful. And it's changed the way that we work. It's changed politics in this country, I think.
I think it's not just the anonymity. It's also when you have national issues, there's a lot of direct communication. But you also have the news media, thank goodness. We have balance. When you're talking about local issues, and I'd be interested in your perspective, local news is almost non-existent.
Decimated.
Right? And so, I started my journalism career at WPAG here covering the Washtenaw County Commission. And that right now that has a budget of $500 million a year. And there's nobody covering it. There's nobody watching how that money is being spent and challenging it. And, I think hopefully we have good public servants there. So where does the conversation take place if there's no journalism? It takes place in social media. And somebody has a gripe and somebody else has a gripe, and then you don't really know what's going on. And when you don't have journalism, then all of a sudden that's where the stories are happening because you've starved journalism. And so I think on local issues, and I wonder what your experience is of being covered locally, if you're finding that more stuff happens on social, or if you're actually getting actual coverage, in what little local media is left.
Well, I do. Look, I can't articulate when I think that we have to. I'm worried that local media is being decimated, and when I talk about local issues, I'm actually probably luckier than some in that I do get national coverage, and the Free Press and the News are local papers, but not in the way that I think of MLive or so when you really get down towns like Ann Arbor, or it's very difficult to really keep an eye on the Washtenaw County, whereas the Free Press and the News are larger papers that are being decimated too. Their budgets have been cut, their reporters have been cut. Social media is powerful because of the number of people that use it. And the way that it is the way that you reach the largest amount of people. Now we do have algorithms that help you target right down to who you want to reach. Twitter is a bigger conveyor of news than anything is. And it's quite frankly, the large number of people that use social media that don't have to pay for it. That's, you know, the media, the traditional media that we know is having a very difficult time being able to raise revenue, et cetera, and ads have become very targeted. So it's a whole variety of reasons. I think this campaign, as we go into the 2020 presidential, that you will see social media be more powerful than the regular media, the traditional media that we've known.
Can I just mention to Daniel's point about local media, and I'm sure you know this. I mean, you have the privilege, you're at a very large institution that was recently, I think you mentioned, bought by a billionaire, which perhaps is the new model, right?
It's problematic though, because like we can't all have sugar daddies. Like we can't rely on that. So, and it's, you know, if we have, I'm sorry to interrupt, but
No.
you know, if we have one less person covering the White House, that's okay because there's a million people that cover the White House.
Yeah.
If we have one less person covering Ann Arbor City Hall, that's not okay because we probably don't have anybody covering City Hall. And you know, like the presidential politics are sexier, federal, you know, politics are sexier, but in terms of your day-to-day life, whether it's the schools your kids go to, like whether your road is paved, which none of these roads are paved, I don't understand this. You know, but I mean, but I mean, like all the decisions that affect your day-to-day life are made at these local levels, at your local school boards, at your local city councils, at your sanitation districts, and so few people are covering them.
Yeah, and I don't think a lot of people below a certain age realize the traditional path for media, which was to start someplace local, as Daniel mentioned, and then move your way up, you know?
I was at the 20,000 circulation Lansdale Reporter.
Is that where you started? Where is that?
It's suburban Philadelphia.
Oh, okay. And I was going to mention an anecdote about this. I used to cover Oakland County, and, you know, for example, there was a member of it was actually an all-Republican city council, so you would think that they would have nothing to fight about, but because I think there was a downtown, they fought like cats and dogs. And they would send out information to you as the local reporter about, you know, you understand, the type of things that are going on that may not otherwise get exposed. So there was somebody on the city council who had a relationship with the one of the tax boards, so his property didn't get properly assessed, even though he had recused himself, he'd done everything properly, but he'd been under-assessed. Basically, he ended up getting hit with a tax bill of about $15,000 extra because of the reporting that I had done. But there was really, literally thousands of people doing this around the country previously. Just to give people a context, or people who watch this later, you know, I think the Free Press is at about 100 people last I checked. When I left, it was at 330. And, you know, you could probably double the number again prior to that. So I'm sure you could speak to what it was like.
I've been at the LA Times for 20 years now, and at its height in the early 2000s, we had 1,200 people, editorial, so reporters, editors, photographers, everybody who makes a newspaper. By last year, we were bought by Tribune, which became Tronc, and turned into this nightmare scenario. We were down to about 400. They were about to lay off a fifth of our staff. They were about to close our DC bureau, and then we were bought by a billionaire who basically saved us. And now, since he bought us last year, we've grown from 400 to 525 people, and we have probably 100 jobs on our job openings board. I mean, it's incredible. So I'm really happy for us, but this is not the solution for journalism because we don't have enough billionaires to buy papers.
But it speaks to the fact that there's not currently a viable model in media, and I don't think that the people in media are adequately really communicating this, that the profit model disappeared with the creation of the internet. I think the term used now is a disruptor, right? So the internet was a massive disruptor, and you had this perception that if we give the product away, everything is going to be so valuable on the internet that we'll all be rich. And if you just go track the NASDAQ was like up here in the 2000s, or I guess from your guys' side, it was up here and then it dipped and now it's back up for those of you who are still invested in the NASDAQ. But it was also speaking to the fact that the initial kind of excitement around the internet did not translate to the billions of dollars that it has today with things like Snapchat. So, and you know, the problem is that obviously it didn't work out that way. The value of a click is really low, and I don't think a lot of people understand that context. And then Google and Facebook are eating up the pie of advertising dollars faster than it's growing. So just for that context.
And now Amazon is growing in terms of its ad. And now you've got journalist organizations doing Snapchat stories. So it is all kind of feeding on itself.
I was going to the first Republican presidential debate in 2015, and they told me they wanted me to Snapchat it, and I was like, I thought Snapchat was just I didn't have it installed on my phone. I thought it was something that teenagers used to send each other inappropriate pictures. But I was like, really? Like, this is what we're doing? And I don't know. I guess it is what we're doing, but
Well, how did you end up handling that? What did
not
you do?
well, because I don't know how to Snapchat.
Yeah.
I can tweet well, but
And it's not a good interface. Just
No.
because these technologies have value on paper, Snapchat is, I think, it's just not intuitive.
I don't really get it.
I don't think it's you.
Yeah.
And now the irony is that, Google announced that it's putting $300 million into local news, right, to support different local news organizations. And Google did the same about a year ago. And so there are all these organizations that have actually destroyed local news by not having a model where every time you click on a local story, we get a few cents, because we don't. And now they're trying to be, so what is news? Is it a commodity? It's not, because we're not getting paid for it. Is it a public good? Is it where does it land in all of this?
And can I just mention one point related to that? Because I was debating with a friend last weekend who's slightly younger than me, so I'd consider him almost a millennial generation, but he's also at the age where he's used to all information being free. And so we were having this argument about how information should be free. And I guess part of the context, I was hoping he was here so I could kind of walk him through this, but part of the context that he didn't understand is that newspapers and things like that, they were a nominal fee. Is that fair? I had to think about it as he and I were having a conversation. You might pay, 10 cents 40 years ago, or $1 or $2, but then, 5 or 10 people read it, particularly pre-internet, right? Or if you go to developing countries like, Colombia or India, I'm imagining people who don't have, now you have greater access to mobile and stuff, but people would read the paper, right? And then it gets passed to other people. The information passes around word of mouth. So the actual cost of it was nominal. I would say almost inconsequential. Isn't that fair? Most people, I would say, could afford the paper unless they just couldn't afford the very basics, And so
The ads.
Right.
So if somebody were to argue that information should be free, well, now information is free, but it's like saying you should always tell the truth, and then there's context in which that wouldn't make sense. So if information is free, well, we don't now have the outcome. Wouldn't you guys agree that we were looking for if we would want information to be free and the commodity is no longer, so it's kind of like be careful what you wish for, you know what I mean? Because things like Breitbart can disseminate hateful or frankly sort of misinformation very easily. And I'd also be curious to hear what you guys think. I don't mean about what you think about, we can come back to this, but about how easily misinformation travels, because that's part of the problem of social media.
As an agency guy, I was always happy that people were paying for news.
It's like
Subscribers.
Yeah.
Theoretically, I understand, information is important for democracy, but it drives me crazy. Like, we'll get emails or tweets. Like, if I tweet out an article and somebody will tweet back at me, well, that's behind the paid wall. That's not really a news article. Like, they feel like they should automatically get it for free. And, it costs money to travel places. It costs money to, fire up your computer and have an office. And, news gathering costs money. And it's not like they're making, huge profits. So.
Right. But one of the ironies is that they were making huge profits right before the internet hit. So I think it made agencies, you might know better than me that you're in management positions. It made it more difficult to be prepared, wouldn't you say, for the change? If you're making, some newspapers I think were making 20% profits or 10% plus profit margins, which to put that in context, I think GM in a good year might make a 3 or 4% profit margin. So the question is, I
think it's one of the reasons we were so slow to respond, because we had been so fat and happy for so long.
Yeah. I heard a story about how at the LA Times it used to be normal to only fly business class.
Yeah, if you were going over, then that certainly does not exist anymore. Now it's like they'll have me drive in the middle of the night from in a Pinto or something, as opposed to paying. If you were going a certain distance, but you were not allowed to fly coach. There were people that wrote 1 or 2 stories a year, and I don't know what they did for their salaries. But those days are long gone, unfortunately.
Thank you. Kind of shifting from some of the negative aspects of social media, I think each of you might have a pretty distinct perspective on this next question is, what do you really look for when you're engaging with an audience via social media? Congresswoman, maybe we could start with you. Just how do you frame your posts to appeal to or to engage to different readers of just different generations, of different geographic locations, and for everyone else, I mean, what do you seem to think is the most effective way to reach your respective audiences?
Well, social media has many different platforms, and so you have to, and different people. I actually got AOC. I had this idea that, I mean, she's really, you got to admit, one. Can you hear me? There, sorry. AOC, I think, is one of the most effective political people. I think she's more effective than President Trump at social media. So I said to leadership, I want to bring her in to have people. She could teach other members about social media. And she was actually one of the most articulate people I've heard talking about how to use social media. One, she told us to be authentic. But Twitter was what you used for projects. Facebook is what you use as a member of Congress to communicate with your constituents. And Instagram is what you use to begin to build support for something, which I actually thought was very good. I use Facebook. John Dingell used Twitter. And John Dingell was very good at Twitter. But he was short and he could be. I use Facebook because it's a way that I express myself. I want people to know where I've been and where I'm going, and I can go on a rant on it. And the rant you heard me do first thing today is what I did last weekend. But I think it's very important to use the medium that you are the most comfortable with and the most authentic with. So Facebook's what I use, and I'm not as good as John Dingell. I don't have good one-liners on Twitter, so you use what you're good at.
What kind of response do you get from your constituents?
Depends which day it is. I was sitting there listening to you talk about Black Lives Matter, and I can promise you next week I will have all those death threats again, because the Violence Against Women Act will be up. And it has a gun provision in it, which the NRA has decided that it's taking on in the last 48 hours, and it's calling my bill that's part of it a poison pill. And whenever the subject of guns come up, it is like what yours is probably. It is just vitriolic, and you're not supposed. Everybody tells you not to read the comments. I do read the comments, and every now and then I get really, I respond, which they also tell you not to do. So, but that's one of my problems with social media, is just how vitriolic people can become. And the trolls are getting worse. I do think that the trolls are absolutely getting worse.
For me, in my current job, I mean, it was always, in corporate communications, it was always, what's the audience and what's your message, and then you figure out how you're going to reach them. Is it a video? Is it an article? Is it a news release? Is it a, whatever? And now we have all these different social channels. So my two biggest audiences right now are in Rwanda and Ethiopia. Rwanda is Twitter and Instagram, and Ethiopia is almost entirely Facebook. So I just know that about my audience. And so I use those. It's basically the same messaging. But we deal with controversial issues around family planning and abortion and contraception, and we get a lot of heat from all sorts of people and over there. So it's not just a U.S. phenomenon by any means, and you just have to be ready for that. You have to accept it as just part of the communications game.
It's so interesting to hear this stuff. I want to mention, since you had me thinking about Africa, how social media is used in, I would guess, other parts of the developing world. And you've probably seen this. I mean, in Nairobi, because the actual traditional media is not, I'm speaking of Kenya now, which is one of the stronger, economies and democracies in East and Southern, and really all of Sub-Saharan Africa. And so people will use Twitter to figure out traffic jams. If there's somebody, I don't want to paint a picture of Nairobi being super dangerous. It's not. But if there's a robbery taking place, in broad daylight, like a stick up or something, people can actually read that in real time, which, you could not have communicated, I don't think, in media in any, so there are some positives to that. Also, I saw at NPR, they had, I can't remember the guy's name now, but he was excellent at sourcing information on the ground in Syria, which, obviously you just cannot have the bodies on the ground. So I think that, sometimes there can be, some positives. It's not all sort of bleak.
A couple of you touched on this next question, so that's a great segue. There seems to be a lot of contention surrounding the tension between content moderation and free speech. So I'm curious all of your thoughts on this. Many argue that social media, of course, is accessible, makes things more transparent, but then on the other hand, you do have this argument that comes up of that. So I'm curious what you think between content moderation and free speech.
I mean, I don't think that free speech is, like you would know, Daniel, the South African model. I'm sure you would know countries in which free speech, I mean, including I would argue, this country, every type of free, every type, the type of things that you're hearing from people, I don't think fall within the confines of free speech. I don't think anybody would agree that they do. And, there are countries like South Africa where you cannot, it's built into the Constitution, where you can't just say whatever you want, right? You have to, there's some limits on what you're able to say and what's appropriate and what's not appropriate. Obviously, we're not at this point in this country. I think our definition of free speech is pretty broad, but I don't know if you have any.
I mean, the thing that concerns me is if you get rid of certain users, like I don't want to see racist, I don't want to see sexist, I don't want to see any of these in my social media feeds. But if you get rid of them on Twitter or whatever platform, they find another place. Yeah. And like 4chan, I don't even know exactly what 4chan is, but it's bad things happen there. So is it better to at least have it out in the open so it's there? I mean, I don't have the right answer to it, but because I don't think, racist stuff, sexist stuff, violent stuff belongs in these places, but at some point I do also want to know what these people are thinking.
Yeah.
I have some of the most vilest comments written on, and I never take anything down. My staff has told me I should take the death threats down, and if they're really over the line, I do, but I am
the FBI, nobody steps in, federal authorities, they don't flag this stuff?
No. I mean, you can flag, like, I've been told that I should bring it to people's attention more. No, we don't. I mean, Facebook is trying to take more, quote unquote, more responsibility than they used to, but no, nobody is. But I'm very worried about freedom of speech. It is very important to me that we protect freedom of speech. And we're going down a dangerous path in this country right now, where I think there are people that would like to take it away. So we've got to really protect the fundamental pillars of our Constitution. I never thought that we would live in a day that we would see freedom of religion, freedom of speech, some of the basic freedoms and freedom of the media under attack the way they are. So while I don't like what I read, I'm going to tolerate it because freedom of speech is what makes America unique.
I'm not a big fan of the laws that you're mentioning in South Africa or in in a lot of the countries where I work, because, it enables the powerful and disenfranchises people who aren't. And so it's awfully hard to legislate.
Yeah. But it gets to be a little Orwellian, don't you think, Congresswoman? Because you're talking about, now we have an instance where, I mean, I'm sure you probably don't agree with this position, corporations are treated like individuals, and part of their freedom of speech is the ability to donate as much money or, wealthy billionaire as they want to any campaign. Would you consider that freedom of speech?
No, I don't. Okay. I would do anything. I do think that they've got unlimited funds, and we need to do something about money's impact in politics. So I think that becomes far more complicated. But, I didn't know it was in my bucket list, but Jim Harbaugh made me honorary team captain of the football team last year. And all of a sudden he goes, Debbie, do you have something for the kids? Want to talk to the kids? And, what do these kids want to hear from me? But I ended up, I love our flag. I think our flag stands for everything that's right about this country. And I don't like people who burn it. And I don't like the fact that people are kneeling. But what's great about this country is that they can. And they can do it without fear. Well, now they do it with fear. But you should be able to always express, and to me, that's fundamental about who we are as a country.
Are you really worried about freedom? Who are you worried about freedom of speech being curtailed by? Because I'm more worried about...
Start with the White House.
Oh, well, okay, yeah, right. Touche. But like the ability of like a certain news agencies to be able to trade in persistent misinformation. And I understand sort of the Trump argument that there's fake news and that there's a bias in everything. I can see the bias in the New York Times. But I wonder if you think it's a right, particularly because you have power as a legislator, to persistently trade in misinformation, because this can have really insidious, I mean, we're seeing it here, but you could take examples like Rwanda, that is an extreme example. You could look at like the former Yugoslavia, places where, I mean, am I wrong? Where persistent misinformation is peddled, it can have its own, and then you're able to profit off of it on top of that. I mean,
That's why you need a free and open press that holds people accountable.
but so we have a free and open press, but there are agencies that are, basically, I'm just going to be explicit, specifically Fox trades in, I mean,
That's why I go on
objectively-
Fox, and I encourage Democrats to do Fox, because
But some people will watch Fox and MSNBC and they'll say, well, this is one side and this is the other, but it's really a false dichotomy. It's a
that
false
is true.
juxtaposition.
But I mean,
Do you think there's anything that can be done legislatively, I guess is what I'm asking.
it's very complicated, because I do believe in a free and open press, and what you want to do is to educate people. So right now, I'm really encouraging my colleagues to do Fox. Now there's some I'm going to get in trouble on this, so I probably shouldn't. But I mean, Fox can be over the line, but if enough of us go on and try to give the other perspective, then you give that other perspective. So I try to go at it that we need to make sure that we're making all voices are heard. And you want to educate people so that they do know that they're getting different perspectives and it's not straight news. We know that Fox is a conservative station. You try to say that to people.
Well, I think it goes to media literacy, and I'm teaching kids, teenagers. One of our fellows is studying this, so I feel like I'm stealing her thunder. But the difference between a news show and an opinion show. Sean Hannity is not Chris Wallace. Rachel Maddow is not Alex Witt. So but I don't think viewers or readers necessarily, understand those lines perhaps as well as they used to, or the editorial page versus the front page of the New York Times. So I think part of it is really increasing media literacy in this country, because I don't see how you stop. Again, it's another case. I mean, I don't see a legislative solution because that's like the First Amendment, and I don't see. If you stop one source of misinformation, another one's going to pop out. It's like a black game and whack them all or whatever. Mm-hmm. So I don't see how you can get at it that way. I think it has to be through education.
That was well said.
Thank you.
I'm stealing the word.
Thank you. So how can journalists, communication strategists, or political figures combat the perception that social media is oversaturating the public with news content? Now that we have so many different platforms, there's this idea that there's too much, so I might as well just turn it off. So how can people combat that?
Well, I think turning it off sometimes is a good idea, and finding other ways of communicating with each other and reading. And finding other ways of getting your news and information. I'm a massive user and poster, and but sometimes you do have to step back a little bit, and I don't think there's anything wrong with that. But I wouldn't say disengage, and I wouldn't say that you have to engage more. We all need to have a bit more balance, and I think it used to be an open forum. It's become something that I don't think people are very happy with, and it's not necessarily contributing to the right kind of dialogue. So, maybe you take a step back and we figure out how to use it in a better way.
I think you can make that same argument about some traditional media, where on cable, you have 6 people yelling at each other for hours and hours and hours at a time, and we don't get really any world news anymore. We don't really get that much financial news unless you go to one of the financial stations. I mean, it's so dominated by DC, and I think obviously DC is important, and I cover it, but I don't know that we need people yelling at each other for hours at a time. I don't know how productive that is.
It's back to your media literacy, because this massive cyclone in Southeast Africa, it's just decimated Mozambique and Malawi and parts of Zimbabwe. Huge story, millions of people affected. You haven't seen a frame of it on TV. I think NPR has had some very good reporting on it. But so it's back to the media literacy. Like,
But
if you want to know more, then go out and figure out where you can find it.
But as big as NPR is, they have because I worked for them, they have a sort of circumscribed audience. It's like a very large, I wouldn't call it a bubble, but not everybody is aware of them. And then, when Reuters was at its peak, because you worked at Reuters when it was like this massive, robust organization, you guys would have been the ones to feed that. You would have been feeding it to a bunch of other agencies that would have probably relied on you because they didn't have people in those remote areas. Is that fair?
That's fair, and I would argue that Reuters is still there and is still putting it out, whether people are printing it or putting it on their TV. So, Reuters TV is putting out images every day from the cyclone. Our station's actually airing it.
Yeah.
So I would actually say to you all, I watch Hallmark Station, and you get saturated. And actually, right after I just said to John, I cannot watch any more news, and I watched the Hallmark Station at night. The Washington Post did an article that more people were watching the Hallmark Channel because, and its numbers have gone up because people were tired of the news. So I think people are getting tired of all of this verboseness and need a break too.
We're part of the tiny house nation in our house. Yeah, we definitely watch a lot of HGTV.
Great. Well, thank you for that. I think now we can switch to some individual questions for each of you, but feel free, others, if you have a comment or response to pitch in. So.
All right, so Seema, we're going to start with you. So you've spoken a little bit about your past experience with social media and your reporting. So our question is, as we look toward 2020 and as you reflect on your work covering the different political presidential campaigns, how do you think social media will evolve or continue to play a role in such a fast news cycle?
I feel like every cycle has just gotten faster and faster and faster, and we might not know what the next development is, but there will probably be some other new development that if we had this panel a couple years from now that we would be talking about. And it's like if you look back at 2008, then candidate Obama announced his VP pick by text, and it was so innovative. And now I think that would be so old, So I think we don't know what's going to happen, but I think we can guarantee that it's just everything is faster and faster and faster, and it's good in some ways and bad in some others. I mean, like as a reporter, you're expected to do a lot more now, I feel like, than you were before, whether it's tweeting, blogging, live streaming, plus writing your articles. I mean, there's a lot of different activities, but I worry that it leaves less time to do the longer, more thoughtful pieces because you're so obsessed with getting every little bit out there. But at the same time, also, you're allowing readers or viewers a way to experience campaigns, experience rallies, to, be somewhere that they're not physically in a way that they never could before. So I like that it helps, it gives viewers or readers an additional perspective, but I fear what it does when, the number of reporters is shrinking and our time is increasingly spent on things I think that matter less than, the substantive, the more difficult work.
Like a quick snippet of video from a rally that you're at. That's what you mean.
Right, yeah.
You have to spend a lot of energy on that. Is that fair?
I mean, it all takes time, and and also you only have so much mental capacity. So that really deep policy story you wanted to do, if you had to spend, if you had to tweet this and blog that, I mean, if you don't have the time that you can spend on it, our editors I think sometimes recognize that, but there's dwindling resources, or there has been for the last several years, and so you can only do so much, and I fear what suffers is that more substantive. I mean, we're still doing we are still doing substantive work. I don't want to, that to be the headline, but I don't think we're probably doing as much as we did, in campaigns 20, 30 years ago.
But it's also like a lot of pressure on you. It's like you have to do the substantive piece. Is that fair? And then you also have to tweet, and you have to, make explicit that your Facebook is your own opinions, perhaps, or like, what can you talk about the balance of that as a reporter?
Yeah,
because I checked out of that. I did not want to be on every platform.
I've made my Facebook totally private because in the 2010 campaign, I wrote about Jerry Brown or somebody associated with them calling Meg Whitman a whore. And so somebody broke into either my or my husband's Facebook page and found they found a picture of us as our wedding picture. It's a lovely picture. But I was really alarmed to open up a blog that is complaining about me with our wedding picture at the top and about how my ears normally don't blush so easily. So I totally locked down Facebook because that was just a little invasive. And so I kept that totally just personal friends. And then Twitter I use as my main. And then I try to use Instagram, but I'm not very good at it.
But doesn't it, it's kind of it's pushing you to your upper limits of your capacity. Like you're a high level, really experienced reporter, fair, and it's a lot of extra work, right? It's like you're kind of doing, I know you know this as well, at Reuters and at all of the places, NPR, et cetera, you're you're having to, it's like you're having to wear 5 hats.
Yeah,
Is that
yeah.
fair?
I mean, there are only so many hours in the day, and if now I'm spending an hour of that day tweeting, which you wouldn't have during the 1992 or the 2000 campaign.
Yeah.
I mean, there are only so many hours in the day, so I think it does affect you. And also, I mean, we have to think about what's important, and I think every campaign or every newsroom is reevaluating that. Like, is it important to have every single one of President Trump's tweets like front and center? I don't know. I mean, I think that's a question we get asked a lot, and I think there's a discussion to be had there. So I think I think we're trying to figure out what the best ways to use these platforms are, but I don't think we've come upon the magical balance. I mean, the only thing would be if we had unlimited resources and we had a ton of people we could throw at this, but that's not reality.
Right, one person doing the live and one person doing the reporting and whatnot. I mean, I see that in TV news where you have people this live imperative where people have to be live all the time. That means they're not talking to any sources.
Exactly.
They're not actually going and seeing. They're standing on a street corner and the thing's happening around the corner, and they can't go and see it and experience it. And so that's just in traditional, live TV. And so, when you're talking about these other things, it's even worse.
And sometimes, for debates, for example, I think we do a good job there of throwing a bunch of resources on it. So you have some people who are fact checking, at the spot. Some people are writing the larger story. Some people doing the social media. But that's not the usual circumstance where it's we only have one reporter at a rally. And so how much you want to talk to voters, you want to tweet about what's going on, you want to take some pictures, you might want to shoot some video, and you have to write a story. So you can't. I mean,
and you've got kids and a family and a whole personal life as well.
Well, no, not during campaigns.
Right. Yeah, that sounds like a lot of pressure. I mean, it feels like a lot of pressure. I mean, you've been in the business long enough to see the change. Do you feel like you're under more pressure now to produce than previously, or a different type of pressure?
I think it's a different type of pressure because, I mean, the internet it existed when I started newspapers, but it wasn't. It was still very much thought of as a print product. Like you were writing for the print paper the next day. They would post the story online at some point, and that was it. That it wasn't. Now we're digital first. We time our stories to go online when we believe they're going to get the most traffic, and the print paper almost feels like an afterthought, which is kind of hard because I love the print paper, and you were constantly updating. Before you didn't have the opportunity to update. So if somebody scooped you on something, you had to wait till the next day to get it in the paper if you could match it. Now if somebody scoops you on something, you can match it right away, it's good because you're not dying for those 24 hours, but it also takes up time. But it also, it allows readers to get the most current information. So it's definitely changed. And it is a different kind of pressure.
That was interesting. That's really interesting.
So shifting toward a more political point of view, Congresswoman Dingell, we want to know, how do you feel that the way that you use social media and having social media has either in a positive or negative way affected your news coverage?
Well, I think social media, I mean, again, it's different platforms. So use Twitter to, I think it enables people to know where you're standing on issues, what kind of hearings are happening, what's happened on the floor, to keep people, how did you vote, why did you vote? Twitter is a good, and I do, even though I say I'm not like my husband, he was good, period, but I do use Twitter to do that. Facebook is how I want people to know where I've been. I want them to know that I'm working for them. I want them, you can talk longer. So I do think social media allows political people, elected officials, to communicate with a broader group of people than you used to be able to about what's happening, to get their input, to get their thoughts. So I think it's a tool in a toolbox to use in terms of communication. One of my problems with social media, period, if we're really going to get into that, is we no longer have relationships. People don't talk to each other. Every commencement speech I give the same. Relationships matter. I'll tell the kids that work for me, call somebody. Well, they don't understand how to dial a phone and have a conversation. Their definition of calling somebody is text. I said, well, did you talk to them? Well, I texted. That's not talking to somebody. That's not having a conversation. That's not understanding how someone feels or what the dynamics are of a situation. So I think social media is a tool in a toolbox, but I also think live human relationships is very important too.
And then next question is for you, Daniel. So you've mentioned that much of your reporting career took place before the influx of social media use in journalism. So as a consumer of news now, what are some differences you see between how you reported, how your deadlines operated, and how the sharing of news occurred during your career versus now with Twitter and other forms of social media constantly looming?
Right. Well, I knew that I was asked to be on as the gray hair about the old days of journalism. Yeah, I mean, you had in radio, I had an hourly deadline for whatever the update was on the hour. With Reuters and in TV, it became hourly and then by the minute and eventually by the second to beat the competition. But it was always about being right as well. And so often we were beaten by AFP, Agence France Presse, on a bunch of stories. But our subscribers didn't use the AFP story in general until Reuters or AP came around because they were fast, but they weren't always accurate. And that was their reputation. There was this need for speed, but it had to be good. It had to be right. And I'm not sure that we. I'm quite sure that we're not as disciplined anymore about moving things quickly without background, without sourcing, without and we as consumers are too quick to take it in and then turn it around and then realize that what we've just put out is a false story, and then it's awfully hard to pull that back.
And Alex, how do you utilize your background in journalism for communication strategy, and what role does social media play when consulting about the most effective strategy?
I think also Daniel could speak really well to that because you've spoken quite eloquently about this. But I think one of the values of social media is so that you can engage. If you're a nonprofit and you want to speak to your audience, you can engage that audience. One of the ways in which social media can be valuable is, for example, I was working at a think tank in Detroit. If the executive director is speaking, she wasn't a big tweeter, you can share in real time what information she's sharing, or we kind of trained her to, if she was at an event with Kresge or another large foundation, she would, be able to share with her platform, and she's an authoritative figure, sort of what was going on at that event. I think that's one way in which it can be valuable. I think that a lot of places, honestly, are not up to speed on their social media platforms. They don't understand how the metrics work, what the best time of day to put information out is. A lot of times it can be something as simple as putting out in the morning, because that's the time when a lot of people are, logging in, or right at the end of their day. I think for a lot of places, and I think corporations are caught up on this, but it's about communicating your own story on your own platforms, because they just are not, as we've talked about, the bodies on the ground anymore to really communicate as easily, what's going on in maybe a suburb of a suburb of a suburb of LA, because there aren't the bodies there anymore, or they might parachute in kind of periodically. The organizations, say, in that area, just as an example, they have to kind of be better at telling their own stories. And one of the benefits of technology is that it does allow for that. It allows you to tell your own story on your own platforms a lot more seamlessly and clearly, and beautifully and colorfully in ways that weren't possible previously.
But it's also, I think, to add one little thing on the journalism part of it, I think it also is a potential pitfall, and it's dangerous because the tweets that go viral or the posts that go viral are often not down the center, not as independent as we should be, not as nonpartisan as we should be, which I think has encouraged a generation. I don't want to criticize all young reporters, but I do notice a trend among younger reporters of saying things on social media that you would never say out loud as a journalist before, and that I think it can harm our credibility.
And then lastly, this question is for everyone. So there are a lot of professional journalists and aspiring student journalists in the audience with us today. And we are wondering if you have any advice for young politicians or young journalists looking to break into their respective fields, as well as succeeding in their respective fields, especially in a time where both journalists and politicians alike are being vilified by the media and the government and by almost everyone, it seems.
I'm letting the media
No.
first.
They say politicians too. Somebody going into politics.
Can you repeat that question one more time?
So do you have any advice for young politicians or young journalists looking to break into their respective fields?
I think if you want to be a journalist, you have to have multiple tools in your toolkit. Now, you can't just be a text reporter. You have to be able to have some sort of technical proficiency. So you have to be able to record audio, in real environments. You have to be able to shoot video, which has obviously become simpler. You can do it on your phone. You might want to be able to actually edit that stuff yourself. That's part of the problem, is that you have to be able to do more things than might be humanly possible for the average person, because you have to do 5 or 6 or 7 different ththings, and you have to be tweeting, and you have to be protecting your Facebook page, and things that you shouldn't have to be dealing with, regardless of free speech, in my personal opinion. But, you have to also realize, I think, the long game, and I think young journalists have to sort of really think about what is going to make this industry viable. I think one of the things that's happened is it's become a lot easier to get a personal story out, and those can go viral, and that is a positive thing. You can write something about almost any sort of experience that's relatable and get that information out there. But I think people mistake that with journalism. Those are not the same thing. Telling your story, however eloquently, is fantastic and important, and it was a part of every traditional newspaper and most media outlets in some form. But I think one thing that some young journalists don't recognize is that part of the process of being a great journalist is really kind of subverting yourself to the subject matter. You are not as important as the actual topic or the story, and your byline. And I think this is the problem with some of the more elite media outlets, is that it's more of the New York Times is a bit of a superstar system, and it's what do a bunch of people in the Upper West Side of New York think of what's going on? And frankly, they don't know what the F is going on. Excuse my language. They might presume that Greek yogurt is a big craze because in their bubble it's a fantastically big thing, and now it's, I guess, big for all of us and has health benefits, which is great. But you have to realize that the subject matter is really important, and it's more important than your name, and it's more important your face, and that's not how a lot of TV journalism works now. I think print is still more like that, but I think that's something to keep in mind, is that the human story and the face to the story is the most important thing.
And that's one of the things I fear with sometimes on Twitter. It's a bunch of journalists basically trying to one up each other and offer hot takes and whatever. And the vast majority of Americans are not on Twitter. And so is it like it's this echo chamber where we're not really out in the, don't do that instead of going out in the real world and talking to real people. But more generally, write as much as possible. Write for your school newspaper, which is fantastic. Write for blog. Write a diary. Just write as much as possible. Learn those different tools, whether it's video, photography. I wish I'd learned to code. I think that would be super cool. Learn how to code and find mentors. And I don't think I really started looking for mentors until I was almost 10 years into my career. And so, some of these, there are a couple women in my life who have just shaped my career. And I wish I'd found them earlier.
We had a bunch of journalism friends over in our apartment in Cairo when we were living there, because a distinguished journalism professor was visiting, and this was 9 years ago, I guess, and the journalism world was collapsing, and we asked him, from your perspective, what's happening? And he said, well, we all have to create a new paradigm, and part of it is becoming multi-talented and multi-skilled, and part of it is figuring out where we can work, where the new economic models are, whether it's a public agency or a nonprofit or a sugar daddy, and try to figure out the new paradigm. And the head of AP Photo for the Middle East said, I take really good pictures, and I manage people who take really good pictures in really difficult circumstances. And I just want to be paid to do that. I don't want to go and discover a new paradigm. So I'm not sure that anybody has the luxury anymore of just being paid to do a good job. That we're all constantly looking for this. And the Knight-Wallace Fellowship, and they've had some great events lately, and they're putting these pins out, which is uphold democracy, support journalism. And I do think that and not to be too corny, but you do have to have a sense of mission to be a journalist. And I certainly, when I was a proper journalist, I felt that every day, whether it was covering a summit meeting or covering a fire at an old folks' home. I felt like journalism was part of democracy and was important. And that helped me through all of it. And it does, right? The story is bigger than you.
Yeah, definitely.
And if anybody's thinking about being journalism, I would hope that there's a level of inspiration there that they're following. And it's not just to get your face on TV or to get your opinion out.
Or get your name out there, which is great. It's important. And I think that's part of the sexiness of, that's why there's such a wave of young people who, there's always going to be people who want to have their name on things, right? I mean, I myself enjoy, I mean, it's cool, you know?
Yeah, I mean, it's a nice side benefit, but it's not the reason.
It's not the reason. Right. And then the devil is in the details a little bit, right? Like, there's certain ways in which when I write about particularly the African-American experience that I try to be sure to, for example, focus on a two-parent household in the south side of Chicago, because people might presume that it's all one-parent households. And I mentioned my experience of writing about particularly Detroit for the Wall Street Journal, because when I wrote about the suburbs, so for example, during the Great Recession, I wrote about people who went from giving to food banks to going to those food banks. I wrote about a guy who went from a mid-level Chrysler manager to a janitor in his kid's school district in Rochester Hills, for those who are familiar with the area, which might be, you know, but his health improved. But then when I wrote about people in the city, when I wrote about the schools, when I wrote about the mayor, it was a lot of sort of simplistic, I wouldn't even call it bigotry, but sort of uninformed. You realize you were dealing with a population that wasn't informed, but the gift that I was given when I was able to write about Detroit was the opportunity, because Murdoch wanted to compete with the Times and he wanted to do general news stories, was the opportunity to connect that person in New York who is, you know, a corporate CEO or whatever, and connect him with the person on the ground. Because when I wrote the big picture stuff, it didn't really quite connect, you know, but when I wrote about actual people on the ground that were hard for people to argue against, that actually connected people in a way that they hadn't previously been connected. Murdoch republished some of my stories in his Australia paper. They used one of my stories as an ad in the subway. And I think that I didn't quite fully realize what I was doing as I was doing it, but I did know that there had to be a way because I could tell people's biases from the trolling on the stories wasn't as bad as you might have thought. So it was just a matter of showing them, you know, the people on the ground in a way that they could relate to. And ultimately, some of the people that I wrote about were actually sent money, and people would write the paper offering to help them. So, you know, I think one CEO had Christmas or Thanksgiving with the woman I wrote about in Detroit. So, you know, that's sort of the gift of journalism, right? And that's one thing that you miss when you're at the high level, right? Because when you're local, it's a little harder, you know, to get that. When you're local, you get more of that sort of engagement from people when you're writing the big picture
and those
stuff.
are really rewarding times. I mean, writing this, like, when you write a story that actually, like, changes somebody's life.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm sure you have a million experiences like that.
They're a long time ago, but yeah, I mean, that was really rewarding, and I kind of miss those.
Yeah, no, I feel you.
So somebody here asked me before we started, and so for a young person, I would get even more practical and down to earth. I have an intellectual curiosity. Ask questions, care about an issue, connect with people. Learn how to write. You got to know how to write. And then you got to learn communication skills. And you've got to show, it's really basic to me. And if you're going to go into media or if you're going to go into politics, I hate the word politics because it's good, but it's been demonized by too many people. But if you care about your community and you want to give back, connect with people, care about an issue. I tell people not to get a political science degree, so if anybody's getting it, I'm sorry. I tell them to care about an issue. Is it the environment? Is it about healthcare? To really dig in and become an expert. So, you know, that's one thing I would say. I don't know how quickly you're going to wrap this up. And I also want to talk about, you know, the freedom of the press to me is so fundamental. And it shines a light on democracy and it shines a light on what's going on. There is another fellow at Knight-Wallace right now who is from Mexico, Emilio, whose life is threatened because he has written about what was happening in Mexico and what was happening, how corrupt the government was. And he's shown a light on what was happening. There are people in Mexico that if he returned, now our government, this is when you say to me, what do people do? Our government at the very top wants to deport him. When we know that his family, he and his children are at risk if he goes back home. That is what freedom of the press is about, being willing to take a risk and shine a light on truth. And we in this country need to be willing to defend that fundamental right and not send somebody back because they've done what's right, but give them the asylum and the freedom they need here.
Thank you for all your responses. We'll wrap it with that. We really appreciate you all being here, so thank you again.
This program was recorded on March 29th, 2019, at the Ann Arbor District Library.